I want to welcome you this evening to our panel discussion on when science becomes news, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. We have some really good panelists with us tonight who have done all kinds of controversial things. Well, I'll take that. They're working on controversial topics. I can't say that they've personally done controversial things. That I do not have knowledge of. All right? So I want to welcome you all here. This is part of an effort called the Purdue Agricultural Engagement Initiatives, and one of those is actually our Issues 360 undergrad student experience. And so tonight we have our Issues 360 students here. Would you all stand just so you can be acknowledged and let everybody know that this is a year-long effort where they're actually learning how to engage on controversial issues with the public. So thank you all that they're committed, and by the end of this year, they will be fellows if they go through the whole process with us. One of the final things that they will do is actually a communication and engagement project, and they will be doing that later in the spring. So we also have the Issues 360 leadership team is here. I'm a part of that team, by the way. I didn't introduce myself. I am Beth Forbes. I am science communication director for the college. The rest of the Issues 360 team members who are here, we have Mark Tucker from AgCom, Mary Helen Halsma is at the back. She's transformational learning for the College of Agriculture. Marco Fernandez, associate dean, got to get the titles right. Melanie Wilson's at the back. She's a grad student who's working with the program. Linda Pfeiffer, who is another AgCom faculty member, and Marianne Brackey are also part of the leadership team. So tonight we're going to have some discussion. I have some planned questions that our panelists are going to go through, but then I'm going to open it up to you all for you to ask your questions. So we'll try to wrap up by 6:30 this evening because I know that you're all busy. We have other things going on, but we'll have a good conversation. So first, I'll start with Dr. Bruce Hammacher. As director of the Whistler Center for Carbohydrate Research and distinguished professor of food science, Bruce Hammacher conducts research in the areas of carbohydrates and health. Among his findings, a potential way to turn off enzymes that process starchy foods into sugars, which might eventually be applied in people with type 2 diabetes and obesity. Hammacher recently served on a panel of scientists that reviewed GMO research for a National Academy of Sciences report released last spring. How easy was it to get 20 scientists from different disciplines to agree to one report?
Okay. Thanks, Beth. I think I'll start out by giving a little background of what the committee was about and how it was put together. And it might explain sort of my response to that. So I guess I would start and say that I am not a scientist who has worked on GE crops. I suppose we all have certain feelings and opinions about GE crops, but my work, as Beth said, has been in that and other areas, mostly related to food macronutrients and their role in health, nutrition and health. And my own background comes out of sort of biology and into food science. So that's it meets at that interface. And I was invited to be part of this 20-member committee, really, that was put together by the National Academy of Sciences to do what I would say is a re-review of genetically engineered crops, where they stand today and what potential they have going forward. It's not the first time I say re-review, and you can imagine it. It's not that there's been other reviews. So the committee, was a group of people from different disciplines. We went through a vetting process, which is always the case with the National Academy of Sciences panels. And by that I mean we went through detailed phone interviews and also on-site kind of interview too that was related to conflict of interests, our past, did we have particular, say that biased opinions that were out of say a norm, either way, and then our CVs and so forth, descriptions of who we are, what we do, were put on the National Academy's site, which this is also the way they do things. And there was like a month period where the public had a chance for response for every member on the committee, whether they had any objections, basically, to any particular committee member. I should say, too, that the National Academy of Sciences, which I'm not a member in, there were a few members on the committee, but it's not necessary to be a member to be on those committees. But the head of the panel was certainly a committee member, and I think, a National Academy of Science member, and I believe always is. But the National Academy of Sciences was initiated under the Lincoln administration a long time ago. It's a group of scientists, and they go out and get other experts in fields to give, basically it's to give recommendations to the government. And so this committee was designed to again, assess the current status of genetically engineered crops, and again, their future potential, and then to write up a report. The report, I gave Beth this four-page sort of summary report from the Academy, and you're welcome to pick that up. So in response to Beth's question, we were scientists in different disciplines. My role on that committee was in the area of health effects, because again, I work in that area. And there was really one other central person on that committee who was involved in that topic. You think it might be more, but that's really the case. There were some other peripheral people. We were responsible for one chapter of that, a large chapter, one of the largest chapters of the report, that was related to health effects, potential health effects. That was our role. The other guy was a toxicologist from Rutgers. And then there were other scientists, social scientists, plant biologists, environmental scientists, you can imagine, that made up the rest of that 20-member panel. So on agreement, there were some, obviously there would be some disagreements. Not so like in what we did, we went through sort of all the different things that are out there, claims about GE crops, genetically engineered foods related to health, and looked at the science supporting those claims. We had public sessions. We had something like 80 people come and talk to us. We had to respond to every comment, and we were happy to do so. It was a lot of work, but in the end, there wasn't, in my area, there wasn't a lot of, we had questions, of course, but in the final report, it was, I'd say the bigger controversies in that panel were in the social science area, where there was a lot of discussion, some disagreements related to large agricultural, biotech companies versus small farmers and that kind of thing, smallholder farmers in Africa. That there was a person from the Netherlands, it wasn't just U.S., who sort of represented that side of development. In the end, I think it wasn't, even though we had long discussions, for the final report, there were not, I would say, there weren't any large disagreements that were, stoppers, for the report.
So is your work done with that group, or are they moving on? Will there be further review from that?
No, the work is finished. Yeah, it was a year and a half of different sessions, and both public meeting sessions, webinars, where we invited different experts, and then a lot of discussions on site and also on phone conference calls. And 6 months to finish the write-up, and that was it.
So where did you come out on the health effects of GM crops?
You know, I always think that a lot of care needs to be taken with new technologies, and a really thorough process needs to, need to go through a thorough process related to things related to health. I mean, I could go in, but I think if there's particular questions on that, I'd be happy to answer specific ones. I think that for the by and large, the claims, the concerns related to genetically engineered crops focused on health were not well substantiated by the scientific literature. There's some areas I would say, and are in the report, a few where I think that we need to really look. For instance, like on the gut microbiome, we need to understand that. I don't think that there's anything to be alarmed about, but just it's a competitive microbial environment, and we should be aware of what's going into it. Also, genetically engineered crops, they're sometimes combined with agricultural chemicals, and they just have to be,
Right.
at least concerned going forward about some things like that. But there wasn't any evidence. Those things have been studied also, and in the literature there was not evidence that there's immediate concern.
Well, thank you for that. Later on, the panelists will be answering more questions, and you will actually have opportunities. If there are specific questions that you would like to ask, we'll leave some time for that as well. Ian Kaplan is an associate professor of entomology, and his research looks at ways to protect bees and the crops they help pollinate. Suspected culprits in the recent decline of bee populations are neonicotinoids. Did I say that correct?
Sure.
Okay, good. Which are insecticides related to nicotine that are widely used. When studies first started indicating a link between disappearing bees and neonics, some in the ag industry became alarmed. What is the potential problem here with the neonicotinoids? And have you faced any criticism regarding your research from those who question the connection?
Hello. So maybe it would be helpful, at least for the students, if you could sort of raise your hand.
I'll just move that forward for you.
There we go. Is this topic one that you guys have heard of before, or is this totally new? If you've heard of this before, maybe raise your hands. Oh, okay, that makes me feel better. I lose perspective sometimes in what's common knowledge and what's discipline specific that we talk about a lot. So it sounds like about half of you have heard of this before. So well, I'll provide some background on sort of what the controversy is. This kind of intersects two different lines of areas or research. The first being related to pollinators. So this has been a very popular topic in the past 10 or 15 years as entomologists and other related disciplines have been concerned about honeybees and related native bees that are undergoing long-term population declines, as well as non-bee pollinators. Things like monarch butterflies have also been undergoing a long-term population decline. So there's been a lot of interest in trying to figure out what the cause of that decline is, or what the causes of that decline are. And so this has been a big research focus that's been against this is I think somewhat recent in the field of entomology, is trying to target what's causing this decline, both from the perspective of these bees, as you mentioned, are important crop pollinators, as for other reasons as well. Maybe these are indicators of just general declines in ecosystem health, and bees are just an indicator that we're sort of picking up and tracking on. And then the second is this discovery and increased use of neonicotinoids, which are insecticides that are somewhat new compounds. So it's a class of compounds that are now used widely across many crops, and in Indiana and the Midwest where we are right now, they're used widely on corn, they're used widely in soybean and related systems. And so the reason that these two stories intersect is because neonicotinoids, although they're relatively safe to mammals, are very toxic to invertebrates. And these are compounds that are applied to crops they're taken up by the plant, and then the plant becomes basically poisonous. So there doesn't need to be contact with the insect. As soon as the plant uptakes these compounds, the plant is more or less can't be eaten by insects for a period there. The reason this is problematic from the perspective of bees and beneficial insects is because the compounds are expressed not just in the leaves where pests eat, but also in flowers. So it's expressed in nectar, it's expressed in pollen, and so there's not good control over where these compounds go within the crop, and they can also travel off-site to neighboring areas where bees nest and where bees inhabit. And so there's been, and these two stories somewhat coincide. In other words, the rise of these compounds has somewhat coincided with the interest in pollinator decline. So there's been interest in sort of connecting these two stories. And there's other evidence suggesting that neonics might be responsible for contributing to or causing declines. But it's complicated and difficult for a number of reasons, as you might expect. One being that it's always easier to pin this down on neonics or any given culprit as causing declines, but the reality is that there have been a lot of issues that have been studied: varroa mites, loss of flowering plant habitat. So there's lots of things that could be causing this, and there's been this big debate over what the cause is or what the relative cause of these factors are. Is there a single cause, or is there a complex of factors that are all contributing more or less equally to their decline? So it's been controversial in that sense, and obviously from the perspective that these are pesticides that are produced and cost many millions of dollars to produce, there's a financial component which makes it controversial as well. Anytime there's a financial stake, obviously there's going to be controversy involved in if university scientists or other scientists say don't use these compounds, then there's going to be some pushback and problem there. And that's kind of where it stands. And it's not unlike something like climate change, where it's a complex issue. People seem to have opinions on different sides. There's a lot of money at stake, and it's become a bit political in that sense of the word. But and in terms of the second part, so I haven't faced any criticism myself yet. So that's been good. I'm still relatively new to this, so we've just started some big grants, and so far on the front end, things have sort of been positive feedback from beekeepers and others who have a vested interest in the topic. But obviously, when you publish more controversial data on these topics, then you can get pushback on both sides, both from people who have an emotional connection to one outcome and you show the other, or in the case of the financial aspect, if the answer goes towards using less of these compounds.
Mm-hmm. So I believe in your current research, you are looking at alternatives to the neonics in insecticide use. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we struggled with that when we were trying to think about how to approach this. So one of the big projects we've been working on recently is in melons, which Indiana grows a lot of, and so is trying to understand in melon fields where growers use neonics to control pests, and then you have neonics applied in corn and in soybean that's rotated with the melons and also surrounds the melons. What can you do? And it depends on what the crop is. So in melons, for example, there are very big pests. There are these cucumber beetles. There are some insects that are really big pests. So we struggled with, well, should we still work with neonics but use different types that maybe are less toxic to bees, or work on ways to apply them maybe in ways where you get less expression in flowers, or should we just remove them altogether and work with pyrethroids or totally other classes of compounds that are the non-systemic, or you avoid these issues? And so because there's different ways of looking at it. There's the alternative chemical alternatives, and then there's sort of the other alternatives which can be harder to implement. I mean, growers use a lot of these compounds, so switching to biological controls or other versions can be a longer-term strategy, but is a bit difficult. So in our current plan, we're still working with them, but trying to create sort of a reduced risk strategy or best management type practices to reduce non-target effects, but within the context of what growers already do.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you. Ron Turco, For research, agronomy professor Ron Turco and his team last year grew hemp legally in Indiana for the first time in 80 years. When word of the study spread, a headline in the Indianapolis Star read, "Pot evangelist claims Purdue growers are the best." Despite the headline, Turco explained that industrial hemp was not grown for smoking. It was part of a project to test the merits of growing hemp for rope, canvas, and even food. Your research caused quite a buzz. An assistant dean working an assistant dean working on soil and food water quality issues. You are no stranger to controversy. What has been your experience in working with the media on controversial research?
Other than cute sayings like "quite the buzz," it's been pretty good. I've been in Purdue a long time, and this is actually not the first sort of controversial thing I've worked on. I worked on pesticides and nitrogen and water and well water. When I first got to Purdue, that was sort of dropped on me, and I worked on that. That actually was in some ways was much more controversial than anything I've done with hemp in terms of those issues, because kind of like what Ian was saying, you're affecting people's direct livelihood if you start talking about pesticide contamination, factors that affect pesticide movement in the environment, where they go, what they do. People get really concerned when you start those discussions, because you actually are on the verge of talking about banning or not using things, and that makes people nervous, and that becomes very controversial very quickly with folks. So that's how I started at Purdue, was on water quality, well water quality. I was involved in a number of well water surveys, and that got a lot of press, got a lot of, we did a lot of work on that, trying to get that straightened out. And it turned out to be we were able to help a lot of folks with some decisions about how close to do things and a few other factors. And at that time, I got, well, your predecessor when you had your other job, Chris Sigurdsson,
Yeah.
suggested that a couple of us would take training in how to deal with the media. So I did that, and I've taken a number of courses over the years at different workshops on media relations, and I've sort of learned how to talk to the media about how to talk to them. And I think that's really come in to my favor in terms of when I discuss things with them now about the world of hemp, and how to discuss it, how to phrase things, how to short term, how to discuss things in a short set of words to them so they better understand what you're talking about. So you get a lot of preconceived notions with hemp. You get a lot of what I've sort of classified as internet knowledge on hemp. And so I get those questions asked about, basically the question comes down to, hemp will grow on a rock, won't it? and it's not true at all, and it's completely false. Hemp is it's actually kind of a pain in the butt crop to grow, frankly. It's not quite as resilient and powerful in the environment as people like to think it is. Well, that upsets people when they interview, depending on where they're coming from on the interview side. So we've spent a lot of time with the media talking about limitations, the issues related to where you can grow this stuff, how you grow it, the fact you actually can't grow it legally right now still, all those kind of questions. So I just sort of walk them through that when I talk to the media about things. I sort of back them up and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is where this sort of sits in the legal framework of what's going on in the United States. And I think I've had pretty good success with that approach in regards to hemp. And I think a lot of that comes out of some of the earlier stuff I did with water quality issues. Still do water quality issues. We still have a lot going there with water quality work. So hemp has been kind of fun, actually. One of my colleagues, Jana Beckerman, has a statement she makes about our hemp work, and her statement is, we find that enthusiasm for hemp is inversely related to knowledge of hemp. So as soon as we start bringing people and showing them data about what will and won't happen with hemp, how you grow it, what you need to do, and then you show them the spreadsheet on what it costs to grow hemp, they get very knowledgeable and less enthusiastic. So that's an interesting process. Again, it's kind of unique in that the reason I got involved was I was asked to sort of do it, and then you don't often get a major new crop introduction in your career time, right? So we grow a lot of corn and soybean in Indiana. We grow approximately 2 acres of hemp in Indiana right now. 2 acres. So I know where all of it is. So
Yeah.
So we'll probably expand next summer. I know we will. So that's on the horizon. But it's how you roll this stuff out, how you get people educated on it, how you move things along. It's been kind of interesting.
So there's been a lot of talk about medical marijuana and hemp, and how does all of that factor in together?
So that's actually probably the most controversial part of all this. Is there's a general notion in some parts of the Indiana community that in some way the all-powerful Ron Turco, is preventing people from growing hemp and or marijuana in the state of Indiana. So I've been told this by people, that I in some way am blocking for personal gain the production of hemp in Indiana. So so hemp is so tied up in rules and regulations and laws, and it's still a Schedule I narcotic. It still requires a whole lot of DEA permits to deal with it. It still requires an Indiana license. I have a Schedule I research license, which means I can work with drugs that have no medical value. That's what a Schedule I research license says. Great, huh? And then I have an Indiana hemp grower's license. And I have Indiana hemp. I can do an Indiana hemp transport license. I mean, I got all these licenses. I feel pretty good about that. Put that on my annual report. So it's the controversy that I don't control the rules. I can't change the rules. Okay, there are federal laws, there are state laws. It's a very rules over us dominated experience, and this is sort of different for me in terms of what you can and can't do with things. So I have to sort of walk people through these rules and explain to them that we deal with the same rules they deal with, and you just can't change things because you don't think it's right. So we work through that, and that's where it's been a little frustrating towards me, in that I don't block anybody from doing things. The law says you can and can't do these certain things. We work within those rules, and I'm not about to roll out and decide just to go kind of wild on these things and just sort of and move around the rules too much. So we're working through the rules. We're trying to get them changed. We do that with data. So we've been showing people, the legislative folks in DC and in Indianapolis, how this stuff grows, what you can do with it, where the limitations are. So we're rolling this out very slowly to try to get a re-examination of the rule set.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it's a good future crop for Indiana?
It will be a niche crop in Indiana, and I think in the future. I think there's some opportunities with it. I think there's some things related to some secondary metabolites in the plant. We're not working on this right now, but there's some opportunities there. I think there's some fiber opportunities, and there's some feed opportunities, especially with birds. There's some interest. We have a lot of interest suddenly in chicken feed out of hemp. It turns out birds love hemp. I'll just tell you that. And our experience on that has been, when we go to our plots, we typically flush out about 100 doves every time we're out there. So it's a very birds really like it for some reason. And then out of Canada, when you buy bird seed, you get a lot of hemp in the Canadian bird seed. So, back to your question on medical marijuana. We have taken a very deliberate differentiation between hemp and marijuana. Okay. It's the same plant. It's cannabis sativa. There's no difference in the plant type. It's the same thing. The only difference is a phenotypic variation in the level of THC. That's it. So hemp doesn't express THC, and if it does above 0.3, then it's marijuana. If it's below 0.3% dry weight, it's hemp. That's the difference, right? Okay. So we take a very deliberate, and when I talk to legislators, which I do really, I'm doing it this weekend actually, on a pretty routine basis, that's the first thing we talk about is what's the difference between the two plants. And the guy in Indianapolis is great, but he works with something slightly different than we work with, and I think he works with it. But we make that differentiation right away. I don't deal with marijuana. I don't deal with medical marijuana. I don't engage on those. I mean, and I get asked that question a lot. And I just basically don't engage because it's not something we work on. Okay. That's not what we do. We work on the industrial hemp side.
All right, thank you. So I called this discussion "When Science Becomes News," and so all of you have been in the news for your science. So how would you describe your experiences? Ron said basically his have not been that bad. Have either Bruce or Ian, how would you rate your experiences of working in science and also working with the news media? Bruce, you want to take it?
Okay. Well, I guess I haven't had so many things get out into the broad press, I guess, but I have. And I think one of the things I realized was that you know, as a scientist, I'm sure, you know, we all feel the same way, is that there's so much to that becomes important to the detail of what you're doing. But you sort of, for the reporter, you have to step back from that and still keep it accurate, you know. And sometimes that's a bit of a challenge, you know, because it can veer off course. Particularly, at least in the, I won't go into the one case. It wasn't like it was bad, but it lasted in the media a fair amount of time, like a couple weeks. And the longer it sort of went, sort of the less accurate I found that it went, because it was being reported off of things. The best was somebody who had a science background, and he would guide me, you know, don't give me so much detail, but I need to know, you know, this amount. Like the New York Times science reporter is an example of somebody that I found in my experience, in that particular experience, is really, you know, zeroing in on what's important and then producing a really accurate kind of, you know, article.
Good.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences. And like Bruce, I don't work a ton with the media. It might be intentional as well. A lot of scientists are kind of, you know, we do experiments, and if things, you know, there are press releases or media becomes involved, then that's fine. But a lot of scientists are sort of very happy to stay in their basement and do science. But yeah, I mean, there were a few stories. I didn't have any bad experience. There were a few early on when I got here that was more kind of, when I went back and read it, I was kind of like, slightly embarrassing for me personally, but nothing super controversial. And I have found that with some of these more, I guess, controversial issues, like when, you know, we had a few of these grants that just got funded, and there were some press releases, and when I was asked to give quotes, I found myself a lot more careful with what I say than I normally am, I think. And so I feel,
That's a good thing.
yeah, it's a good thing. But and I should always think before I speak. But I really was trying to think very carefully, because, you know, it's easy to slip in some things that are not factual, that are just kind of opinions, and you know, if that happens, and it's easy to see how someone could run with this, and it's so it's a little bit dangerous, but no problems yet.
So that happened to me recently. There was a lot of news articles about our hemp stuff, and a couple of Purdue alumni got hold of it. They get, of course, Purdue sends you stuff like every day if you're an alumni. So it's a couple of them got a hold of this stuff, and they were very upset that we were growing hemp, and they let the president know that they were very upset that we were growing hemp. So I had to not deal with the media. I had to deal with the president's office about what we were doing and how we were doing it, and under what set of rules we were operating, and that turned into about a 3-page long memo of how we operated and where we sat in terms of rules and regulations. They were fine with it, but the sort of an indirect effect of the media was to let people know what's going on, and they didn't like what was going on, and they wanted to express themselves back to the Purdue administration about the fact they didn't like what was going on. President Daniels' office was very supportive of us and sent a nice letter back to these folks and said what they're doing is fine. But that was an interesting outcome from that. So
right, because a lot of what you do is. I mean, you're in the field, you're in a research lab, you're out of public sight, and so you're not used to having to explain to the president or to the public a lot of what you're doing. So I'm going to move on to another side issue to the conversation today, and that's trust in science, particularly trust from the public's standpoint. And we're hearing more and more of a lack of trust, actually, among the general public. And it's due to a lot of factors, and it's complex, like so many things that are controversial. But one of the areas that you know, we've in Issues 360, we've been talking about, you know, the variety, the way that trust varies by gender, ethnicity, religion, social class, other factors. But one of the concerns that has been expressed a lot is the amount of industry support, particularly in agriculture, that goes into our research. So from your perspective, what has been the relationship between faculty and research sponsors? Is it appropriate? Have there been problems? Talk about industry and your research.
Oh, this wouldn't be, I would love to have industry support hemp research. I would like to have anybody support hemp research. It'd be great. We don't get a lot of support on it right now. We're still working on that part. But I have had a number of projects over the years that have been basically ag chemical companies supported, or we had a couple of projects where we looked at waste materials from processes, and we looked at how they involved and worked in the environment as well. They were actually all supported by industry. And the way Purdue, and this is the part I don't think the public really understands, is the way we contract those things and the way we set those things up. There's not really a direct tie back to the industry that they can manipulate things too much, in my opinion. I've always felt that we did a pretty good job on the contracting side to protect ourselves from those kind of manipulations. Now, they may not come back and fund you again. That's the risk you take, but that's the science you do. So it's if you have a controversial finding, or you have something they're not interested in or they don't like, that's part of the game. And they sort of buy onto that when they engage in our contracting process. And so that's why I think that part gets lost on the general public, is how we set these things up so that we are fair in our work and we are fair in how we run these things. We do a fair amount of work at Purdue from industry support. So, and again, I work in the environmental area, which does get a little controversial about exposures and where things move and leaching and degradation, those kind of questions. So we've published that material, we've looked at it, we've worked on it, and we've had fairly decent feedback from the industry. And then we've had we've continued support on occasion. So.
Ian, any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, so I haven't had any industry support for my research. I'm not sure I'd be opposed to it, so it's just that it hasn't worked out that way. And but it sort of depends on the project. I think it's maybe case by case. In some cases, if a company was working with us to figure out the genes underlying insect resistance to develop a new variety, that if we find a positive outcome, they commercialize it, great. If not, it sort of dies. That's okay. It gets a little bit tricky with sort of the if you're arbitrating. If you're supposed to serve as some kind of determine what non-target effects are that might affect how the EPA or others in the government rule against or for certain products, that would get a little tricky. Mm-hmm. And even in cases where there's not, that person can say, I'm not biased and it's not affecting me, the perception still is among the public, money is going there. There was a article last week I saw about this, I can't remember who it was. They were tracking all these health agencies, American Obesity Society, and then Coke was giving money to all of them, and they were, even if it wasn't affecting the statement they make about the relationship between drinking soda and diabetes or any of these things, the perception there is still that it's not legit, and so it's tricky in this case, but all the more reason that public funding of science is so important.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, did you have anything you want to add?
Well, we do work with industry, and the Whistler Center for Carbohydrate Research that I direct, and there's 12 faculty in it, is an industry member-based center. So we do, and part of that whole deal is getting a rapport over time with companies so that they feel comfortable and like this would be a go-to place for them to do research. We also, of course, get federal grants and other foundation grants, and like everybody else, we're always working for that kind of thing. I think all of us prefer the federal grants. You have more sort of freedom to operate and versus a list of deliverables that can be pretty stringent. At the same time, I would say I agree with Ian that one has to be conscious about what's the nature of the project that the faculty member is getting, But at the same time, I wouldn't take just any. In the Whistler Center, we say to the companies, what we do best is more basic research that provides a foundation that they can take and find new things, discovery research that they can use that knowledge to do things with. But I've, in my experience here since since 1993, I've not had a grant from an industry that I felt was objectionable, that I felt funny about. A lot of times they're very specific, like you say, to a particular problem that's, dogging that company in the process or something, or it's trying to improve, in our case, in my lab, how do you improve the nutritional quality or health quality of a food? And if it doesn't work, it's like you say,
It's done.
for a new variety, it doesn't go anywhere.
So one of the things that you brought up earlier that has also been something that the public has growing unease with is the speed with which innovation is now leaving the lab and coming into application. And genetic engineering is one of the topics that when polls are conducted, the American public has an increasing, not fear, but slight hesitancy or concern about, have these things been vetted and tested well enough? Do we know enough about potential future impacts? So from your standpoint as research faculty, are you concerned, or how do you feel about the speed of innovation as we're seeing application of the research? I don't have a strong feeling right now. Ryan, you look like you were ready to jump in there.
Not really, but
Oh, okay. You just always look like that.
Yeah, I just ready to go on some stuff. Yeah. So it's I'm not. The question is, you think we do things too quickly and roll things out too fast, or?
One thing in particular, recently the Pew organization does a lot of research,
Right.
and it said the American public is expressing some concern over new technologies, and in a recent study, 68% of adults surveyed were very or somewhat worried about gene editing, for example. That was one of them. So it's not that they're outright.
They're worried.
They're worried. They're worried that there may be impacts that we don't know about yet. They're worried about everything from, are we playing God to is this natural?
Right.
Yeah.
Bruce has
Jump
been
in.
taking
You
That was
probably
part of
know.
our
We get that
discussion,
pretty hard.
certainly. I would, it wasn't like, on that committee, that National Academy of Science committee, it certainly was not, we didn't have, our objective, our charge was to evaluate things in as fair a way as we could, based on the scientific literature. And so I'd say there's a lot of fear even connected with GE crops. There's concern and by some people fear. I personally spent a lot of time because we needed to address for this health area that I was involved in, we needed to address all the points brought up, as well as other concerns in the literature, that we thought were significant enough to that we needed to deal with those. I think just going through that process and saying, here's what the science says anyway, or there's not enough science on particular issues, and try to communicate that out in a simple way. At certain points I wondered, why am I, while going through all these, everything, but I think it's good to catalog everything like that and just simply go through and say, that question about a transgenic protein being found in breast milk, is that a real concern? And it sounds like it should be a concern, but then you read the literature. I mean, I know this because it's close to my field. There is passage of food proteins, peptides from food proteins that can be detected in milk, for many foods. It's not like specific to that one transgenic protein. That's just an example. I can understand the concern, certainly. I would say that communication is just such a big part of, and it's not done well in every case. Even my own field of carbohydrate research and health, there are a number of things out there. If you've gone on a carbohydrate-free diet recently, I would like to talk to you about it. I mean, just some misunderstandings, and we don't always have time, or maybe the inclination to, like what Ian said, to be the best. I think we could be better spokes people
Okay, excellent.
than we are.
Did you want to jump in on that one?
Oh, yeah, well, I would just say I don't have a concern about the speed, but it's more the bringing the public along with, and that's always been something that scientists have not done well. And, well, yeah, you look at GE crops, they've been out for, what, 20 years now at this point or longer. I can't remember when this first introduced, but, and still, I mean, it's been 20 years, and the public is still very misinformed on this topic, and you hear all kinds of strange things. So it's, so I mean, you've had 20 years, and then what speed is appropriate at that point? So.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open this up and let you all ask your questions. So there are models of science communication that social scientists are using, and over in other countries in particular, there seems to be a more push towards having the public actually have input into the research agenda and priorities. So I wanted to ask you, would you consider seeking and or using public input into your own research agendas?
So,
Jump in.
actually, I've done that on a couple of occasions. We do a couple of water quality efforts where we look at some local issues on water quality. We've had public forums on it. We've had discussions. We've taken questions and notes, and people have raised concerns about things, and we talk through that and sort of lay out our research agenda based around that. In the hemp world, we've also engaged a vast cross-section of people interested in hemp. We had a meeting this past summer where we had basically a big breakout session where we had folks interested in hemp come and talk about the questions they had about the research agenda that we were proposing, questions we raised about how that fit with their needs and things. So I have engaged on that question. You typically get, what you get is a real opportunity to engage these people in the discussion of what's going on. It doesn't typically shift you too much because they actually come to the same point you're coming to most of the time about what needs to be worked on. It's just they had a voice in it, and that helps. That helps them understand what you're doing. It ties them to your project. It makes things seem a little better in that way, especially on the water quality side. It's been real proactive. We just published a paper on interactions with basically citizen science and water quality analysis. So we've had people engaged. Citizens collect water samples and do analysis for us, and we've had a big engagement project on that recently and just published that, and it was kind of a fun project in that regard. So it's doable. It just takes some time.
Mm-hmm. Either Ian, want to jump in?
Yeah, I haven't engaged the public directly in my own research, at least outside of those constituencies who are involved in the project specifically. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea if it could sort of be laid out properly. I mean, especially if it was given sort of a series of options and you could prioritize based on this. It makes me a bit nervous, though. I mean, I think I'm still scarred a bit from when it gets political. A few debate cycles ago, I remember when I think it was John McCain or somebody was, going through and pulling out NSF grants and saying, and saying we're funding fly sex or bear DNA, and just you can belittle research in different ways. So. And that's come up again a number of years, and so it makes me nervous. This, to some degree, especially if it gets political, this issue of having the public dictate which projects are legitimate and which ones are not, based on incomplete information about what that project is. And so it's kind of a balance between. I think there can be some dangers on the far end if, depending on how it's laid out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like the idea from the standpoint that I think it would sort of drive perhaps a better public dialogue about science and education of the public on certain controversial issues of science where there's some misinformation out there. I think that could help drive that, and at least let people know sort of what the basis of certain controversial issues are related to science.
Okay. All right. Any questions from you all? Oh, and remember, the little black, these things are actually microphones, so if you make sure you press your microphone if you have a question. Yes, go ahead.
Do you feel that the public, because of the amount of information that's out there and easy access to the internet, that because they can confirm any belief that they may have, that really really leads them to believe that scientists aren't as credible as they used to be? And if so, how does that affect your research?
I have a friend of mine who's a doctor, and he always likes to remind when I make internet jokes about diagnosis. He always reminds me that his medical degree probably is worth a little more than my Google search. So I think people need to keep that in perspective when they do go. I get that a lot with the hemp stuff, right? We get a lot of oh, it should do this and it should do that. Well, it doesn't do that. So, but we sort of try to correct for that in terms of the questions. The social media side, the exposure, all the different avenues. I don't think the scientific community engages very well. I don't think the ag industry itself engages very well there. I think Purdue's sort of engaging a lot better at that level now. I just think we need to be more present and communicate more at a level people can understand. I think that would help a lot. I really don't like some of the way people you can find anything you want on the internet and you confirm any belief you have, and I think that can be a problem, and I think it spreads mistrust in what we're saying. We get sort of even though we do the work and the science, we have the papers, we do the research, we still get put at some weird level that sort of ties to some individual who just makes stuff up and talks, right? So it's sort of disheartening on occasion in that regard. You need to really be careful on that stuff, I think. And I don't think people are careful enough when they make those kind of calls, just judging on some things I've seen recently on Facebook. So it's an issue.
I would just add to that I think it has not affected my research per se, but it's affected, I'm aware of it,
Right.
And particularly I think because of my role in this research center makes me somewhat aware, because in the health area you have lots of stuff, environment too, but you have a lot of things going out into the blogosphere, and it's made me think, like there are New York Times opinion pieces by scientists in the carbohydrate area, and it's not that I have any interest or don't even agree with, I think we eat too much sugar, but I think some basic things are not well understood about carbohydrates and health. That's an example. That's something I know a lot about. But I feel very hesitant. I thought about, I want to write a New York Times opinion piece or Wall Street Journal or whatever. But, we are connected with companies that sell carbohydrate foods, produce ingredients, carbohydrate ingredients. And even that connection, you don't know where it's going to go. Even though my interest would just be in, say, educating about, particular things about maybe the gut microbiota, and, but still, you think differently because of that.
You think differently because you think the companies would not appreciate what you have to say?
No, there's none. I would say there's no feeling from me, or
Okay.
Our company's never in my experience have said, we would like you to say something or even imply that. It's more that, there's like General Mills and, different companies, Mondelez, just to name a couple. It's not to pick on those, but that, hey, this guy's talking about the importance of carbohydrates, say, in the diet, or importance of certain kinds of carbohydrates we get glucose out of, which actually is rather important in many cases. I wouldn't go into it here. But, he's promoting the line of those companies, even when it's not the case at all.
Right, because they fund the Whistler Center.
Yeah,
Right,
because
yes.
they pay a dues, right. They can fund and contract research,
Okay.
but yeah.
They support.
They're members of the center,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
So this isn't really a question, more it's an example. There was a paper published about 3 years ago in the bird literature on an endangered subspecies. I study birds. An endangered subspecies of bird found in Southern California. And the paper was done by a team of geneticists. And what they basically found was that the subspecies was not distinctive genetically from other subspecies, and therefore lacked the distinctiveness to be considered something separate. The result of which would be that this subspecies wouldn't be on the endangered species list anymore. In the acknowledgement section of that paper, there was one sentence that said, "We'd like to thank Joe Smith for helping to arrange funding." And that was the only thing they said about funding in that paper. A rebuttal paper was published about a year later, and they pointed out that Joe Smith was the head lawyer for the Regional Home Builders Association and was leading a series of lawsuits to force the Fish and Wildlife Service to take that endangered subspecies off the endangered species list. So what the geneticists basically did was hid their funding. They acknowledged the source of their funding by naming the individual, but they hid who that individual represented. And I use this paper in my discussion classes here, and doing that just destroyed the credibility of the paper. Nobody in my classes believes anything that the authors said because of the way they failed to disclose their funding. So I just thought I'd throw out that example of dealing with industry funding and the need to be very open and upfront.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent example. Right. Other questions? I can take one more question. If not, okay, go ahead.
As scientists, we're pushed to publish. But when you're working with such a controversial topic, is there any hesitation to publish something that might just get way more attention than you're expecting right out the bat? Maybe to wait to do more research, for instance.
I think if it's something big and paradigm shifting that you really, you want to make sure that what you're publishing is right. But if you have the data, I mean, I would say I don't feel any hesitation. I like controversy, but I would want to feel really. I always, I think we always want to feel secure, totally secure about what we're publishing. And not take something and make something out of it, say in the that's not there.
Well, there's pressure towards this direction because these bigger things, they get in fancier journals, Science, Nature, that kind of thing, and it's become a big issue in my lab meetings. We just discussed this a few weeks ago because in Science published an article asking if there's a reproducibility crisis in science, and most scientists said yes, that basically they can't reproduce some of their own experiments if they do it again. And this sort of relates to public trust of scientists. If you can't reproduce science or data, that's a big problem. And so there's an interesting paper because it went through all the reasons why that would be the case and what to do about it, and one of it was this sort of pressure to publish quickly for novelty reasons or whatever else. And it has huge consequences if that work can't be reproduced, it can't be believed, and there's not an easy answer to what to do about that.
All right, well, I want to thank our panelists. You did an excellent job. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm not sure if they all can stick around for a while, but I did mention that I would like for them to stick around for a little bit, particularly for some of the students if you want to interact. I know we also wanted to get a picture of the students and our panelists together. So thank you all, and we'll see you again next year, maybe.